Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to another Mortal Kombat 1 video. And well, it's been a while. Yes, I'm here, and yes, I'm still doing MK content. With that said though, it's been a really interesting time since I've had that break. So yes, first off, hello, I hope you're doing all well. And right out the gate, I'm just gonna let you all know that this is gonna be a very different video from me from what you typically see on the channel. There's no lore, no characters, it's simply me in front of the camera kind of just shooting the shit. And also touching on why I haven't really covered MK recently, as it all does tie into my thoughts on the game's current state right now. Now, I do want to point out that, right out the gate here, if you expect me to, just be completely shitting all over the game, then you've probably come to the wrong place here. Whilst I'll be highlighting the issues of the game, I'll be talking about what works and what really doesn't, in the hopes that maybe later down the line, it can be resolved. Because in the last few months, I've been seeing a lot of people addressing these issues without kind of giving an answer to them. So, first off, why did I stop talking about Mortal Kombat 1? Well, easy, Tekken 8 was coming out. And much to the conjecture of some of you saying I was bandwagoning the hype, I simply wanted to talk about a different game franchise. You know, something I've done before on the channel. So this change shouldn't be that big of a surprise. And if anything, I feel like it was to be expected. We've covered a lot of fighting games across the genre, but I'm also not going to pretend that was the only determining factor. To put it quite simply, I was unsatisfied with the full product of MK1. And there's actually a variety of different reasons as to why that's the case. It's actually why I strictly focused on just covering the story mode. Because here's kind of the hard, awful, and brutal truth about AAA games now. It's really fucking hard to tell how good a game is on release now, as they are so dependent on DLC and patches to fix a game post-release. As it is basically now what carries a game out from mediocrity into success. And I can think of no better examples than No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk 2077. With that said, I really don't like how this has become a common practice. But back on the topic of the game. On release, it did have a number of different issues I noticed. Yet even so, I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna review it. I'm gonna let the game flourish for a month or two and just see how it goes, and go it did. Just not in the way that I hoped it would. And that is a plethora of different issues that I will be getting into in a second. But before I get into the nitty-gritty details of that issue, I want to talk about another problem that's been plaguing the game heavily. And it's what I'm gonna kind of coin the Schrodinger's influencer. Now, this is obviously a play on Schrodinger's cat, where the cat's both alive and dead. But I'm kind of seeing a similar effect with the community and how it's interacting with its influencers. Or in some cases, very much so against them. You see, we're in this really weird paradox right now where if you like the game, you're instantly a shill. You're a sellout and you're a corporate man. And if you have a problem with the game, whether that be design issues or just its core fundamentals, you're instantly labeled as a blind hater who just wants to see the series die. There doesn't feel like there's a constructive middle ground, where constructive criticism can really be given for the health of the game, as most healthy or good points are kind of snuffed out by the pursuit for hate clicks and rage bait. I find it to be extremely problematic because in all of my years of covering MK, this is easily the most divisive the fandom has ever been, even with itself. So, what's really going on here with the game? Well, I think there's been a variety of different factors that have impacted the game and its fandom in a really negative way. From release window, to marketing, to community engagement, or a lack of. Let's face it, since MK11, community engagement and interaction has been both subpar and extremely problematic. Having very irregular release windows with barely little to no communication. Hell, me, as someone who covered it, didn't know when these trailers would be dropping. So if that was the case, then how on earth would you guys know? And honestly, the same thing can be said with the Kombat casts here, as these were seen as highlights back during the Injustice 2 days, as well as the MKX ones. Now, however, we're just given a heads up 2 days before they go live. My point is that there's a lack of consistency with how NRS can interact with us. And with the game having been 4 months away from its official release, it was kind of go time. The ball had to start rolling. So a regular schedule, slowly but surely leading to the build-up, would have definitely helped. Yet it felt like those trailers were scattered far and wide, being released at such irregular points prior to the game's release. Now, I'm not going to pretend like it was all bad, as those trailers were cut together extremely well, that can't be denied. But I feel like that lack of structure really hurts the game's promotion, and I can think of no better example than EVO 2023. The MK11 finals would be held on the Friday, but the trailer itself would be released on the Sunday, EVO's final day. And even then, we weren't told about that trailer till the Friday of the finals. And here's the thing, traveling to EVO is definitely not cheap. I would know, I paid out of my pocket to travel there. And here's the thing with that trailer as well, right? With it being aired on EVO's final day, you actually have to pay an additional fee to go into the finals arena. Thus, if you traveled out to EVO and did not have that ticket, well, whoopsie daisy, big fucky wucky, you can see why the communication is quite problematic. I also do think that what's actually changed a lot of people's perspectives has been Tekken 8. With the amount of freedom that Harada and Michael Murray get, it feels very real and very responsive. Thus, with us kind of all occupying the same fighting game sphere, it's really hard to not look at that and go, why don't we have that? It's a real shame, and I really hope this changes in the future. Now, touching back on marketing, they really didn't do a great job of touching on the finer details of the game. And I do have a little bit of a tinfoil hat theory as to why this may have been the case. Now, one of the most controversial details of this game has been the implementation of crossplay, something noticeably mentioned in the early release details of this game, yet was sneakily removed and implemented just recently into the game. So all of this came as a very strange and sudden change. So this now actually all ties back into that of the Schrodinger's influencer. You see, I've already pointed out the lack of engagement as well as communication. So who does that leave to marketing? Easy, the people who make a living for it on YouTube. So a lot of us actually involuntarily wind up becoming the marketing for the game. It's an asset I think they know they don't need to do themselves. As well, we have our own thriving community. Thus, when the game comes out and doesn't quite have the feature a YouTuber had mentioned, who do you think is then held accountable and responsible? You see the problem I'm kind of trying to establish here. I think that this has also contributed to the large divide between the community and its audience. The people making content for it involuntarily become a part of the machine, whilst doing what they would normally do for any other game here. So you can see how there's a mess and distrust in the community, and it's only really stirred drama since then. Along with that, let's touch on the Kombat pack, more specifically Janet Cage. Now, on the release of the Kombat pack, we were initially told that Johnny Cage would be a cameo, something that would be changed later down the line, and I do have quite a lot of problems with this. One is how misleading this is from a sales perspective, as people were expecting one thing and then they got another. Whilst mechanically in-game this changes absolutely nothing, you cannot underestimate the fandom of your character, especially one like Johnny Cage, even if he is relegated to that of a cameo. And here's the thing, right? Like, I get it, it's a bait and switch. Like, they couldn't reveal Janet due to her narrative constrictions to that of the story. I get it, I really do, but I just don't think this softens that blow. I genuinely think that a better and a safer pick would have just been to have advertised Cassie Cage, as she's an already established character that features in the very same chapter. So if you wanted a female Cage character, she's right there. Even so, if you wanted to pull the bait and switch later down the line, I think even with Cassie, the reception to this would have been all the same. Like honestly, in general, this whole situation is just not good. I think it would have been better off if they just played to their strengths with Johnny here. So let's start from the top and work our way down here. Story mode. And honestly, I don't have a problem with the story mode at all. I think it does its job very well. Yeah, it's a bit formulaic at this point with its chapter system and kind of what to expect, but it's well acted and well executed for what it is. Whether you like it or not, that's entirely up to you on a personal level. But point is, the story works, it functions, it looks great, and it tells the story it needs to tell. So honestly, story mode, very solid, no issues there. Moving on to the meat and potatoes of the game, I think that the core gameplay is fantastic. It feels more legacy based and in line with elements from 9 and X. The game has a more explosive combo system as well as the return of breakers. Kind of everything I asked for. So I think that the very core in itself is extremely solid. The cameos, however, is where I do take a bit of issue with the game. I know some of you don't really jive with cameos, and I completely get that. But for me myself, I really like the implementation into the system. Yet with that said, the implementation has opened up a meta to this game that I don't particularly enjoy. And it's a practice I kind of see all too common in AAA games, and that's a rotational meta. What I mean by this is that instead of creating a balanced meta, one where everyone's on an even playing field, we're in a state of the game where its meta is heavily based and focused around the cameos, which are patched from season to season. On release it was Cyrax, then it was Lao, and now it is Striker. And here's the thing, I get it, like there's only so much QA can cover, especially with this many variables in a fighting game. But we're like 5 to 6 months in now. We should be at a point in the game where cameos are universally viable across the board, and we aren't stuck in this weird rotational meta currently. Whilst I'm definitely not against nerfing overtuned characters, it feels like we're yet to find a common ground where cameos are all viable in their own way. Now to be fair, I will say that the most dominant cameos in the game haven't been buffed into this position. Instead, they've become a part of this rotation as a previous cameo had been nerfed. Thus, they simply fill in that gap and void from the previous season. I feel like that's only natural in most games. But even so, this far down the line, I don't know if I entirely feel like we're at a place where everyone feels viable. So, how do we fix this? Well, I think it's best to find a well-rounded cameo and build the rest of them around them. Let's say Serena, for example, right? She's a multi-utility character. So let's look at her and say, what can she do that we'd want everyone else to try and do their own way? How can we bring everyone up to a similar level where they're all balanced? Now, with tag games, realistically, certain characters will always pair up with certain cameos better. It's just the nature of them. But we currently aren't at a point where experimental or unorthodox teams are viable. That's my biggest current issue. Going forward, I really hope that some of these implementations are made, because I just think this allows for a far more well-rounded and free-flowing game. But with, like, DLC always constantly on the horizon right now, I don't think we're ever gonna be in that place until the Kombat pack finishes. I definitely think it's worth touching about the current issues the game is facing outside of the gameplay loop. And one of those has of course been the server issues. Something which has been plaguing the game since release, but has been exacerbated since the release of Quan Chi. Fortunately, those issues have kind of been patched out, but it raises the question as to why this has been a problem. What's been going on that hasn't been said? Well, whilst I definitely don't have the answer, I do have a sneaking suspicion it has been their change up to Unreal 4. For those unaware, NRS/Midway have been kind of using Unreal 3 from MK vs DC onwards, creating a very unique and very impressive hybridized engine. So the switch to Unreal 4 was kind of an expected one after so long. But it could also explain why MK1 had longer dev time, having 4 years development instead of the typical 2-year cycle. With that said though, it definitely doesn't look like enough time was put into its infrastructure here. So that's why I believe certain modes like lobbies and crossplay weren't available on release. Because think about it, right? If I can't maintain a connection with someone on the same console, how is that going to translate to an entire lobby of people all across the globe here? It just wouldn't work. And I think that's one of the biggest drawbacks from Mortal Kombat 1 here. There are features from older established games that simply aren't here. And it's so incredibly problematic as it all does tie back into its gameplay. The core that keeps you coming back to playing. Because if I'm speaking for myself, I don't think the game has enough different modes right now. I'll touch on invasions in a bit, but I want to focus on the core gameplay because it's just so good. But I don't think there's enough outside of invasions to supplement that gameplay. Something that keeps you in the loop. Till this day, I think that the Towers of Time is one of the best ideas NRS has ever made. A constantly changing and rotating PvE mode that allows players to control their experience while simultaneously obtaining the skins they want. It always felt like there was something new on that rotational tower. I thought that it was a great mode to have in game, especially if you didn't want to go through Kombat League. There was options, there was choices. The lack of variety and player controlled freedom is what I think makes this game really suffer here. Because at its core, the gameplay is fucking fantastic. I cannot emphasize how much I enjoy it, but there isn't enough meat on the bone for us to chew on for that variety. And I think that's what the game lacks to offer, variety. As once you complete the story mode and go through invasions, what have you got left? Kombat League? And what happens if you get Elder God? That is the big problem and issue there. And as such, even the in-game cosmetics have taken a bit of a hit here, having less variety and options to offer. And the sad part is that it's impossible to not compare it to its predecessor. MK11, for all of its faults and missteps, at the very least, had enough variety that I would say sufficed. Which is a real shame here, because it feels like NRS customization really peaked with Injustice 2. It's been a slow, slippery slope since then, and in my opinion, if they can't do gear, then just stick to skins. MK has like a plethora of different skins to pick from. Oh wait, those are locked behind the paywall. So this now takes us onto the in-game store. And look, I'm all for having like more skins and more fatalities, especially if it sustains the game's lifespan. But Jesus fuck, like sell them at a reasonable price. $10 per skin is ludicrous to me, as typically the best skins are slipped behind said paywall instead of being unlockable in-game. Now, I know an in-game store isn't exactly something new. MK11 also had the same thing. But the difference between 1 and 11 is that the skins you could obtain from that in-game store were actually obtainable. You could get it from grinding out the Towers of Time, whereas here, they're simply locked out. And with Dragon Crystals kind of being a limited resource, there will be a certain point where you do inevitably run out. And that's kind of the weird part of this game, as it slowly but surely slipped into that of live service. Now, let's briefly touch on invasions here. And whilst a lot of people downright hate this game mode, I definitely do not. I see a bunch of great ideas, which on paper sound awesome, but it's the execution of the game mode which I do feel is a bit lackluster here. Because the idea of a tabletop MK game where you get to explore the realms and take a look around sounds very close to that of the Conquest mode. Along with that, you're able to unlock some gear and have some narrative significance. That sounds awesome, but in reality, we get a recycled grind of rotational fights, which you are ultimately throttled into in order to unlock seasonal skins, before then never playing that season again. Invasions is something I really enjoyed the first time around, but its biggest issue is just that lack of replay value, and the fact that this was kind of designed to replace the Towers of Time is ultimately quite disappointing. I think the lack of replay value really hurts this mode, as each season essentially lives and dies by the skins it has to offer. Now mind you, MK11 suffered from a very similar thing, where there was a lot of color palette swaps, and I did find them quite lazy. But at the very least, the grind towards getting those skins or colors was very quick and very obtainable. In Invasions, you have no idea how long you're going to be tunneling for. And with the store being an easier alternative, it's kind of incentivizing you to spend your dragon crystals, especially if you missed the previous season. Now look, I didn't make this video to just shit on MK for the case of shitting on MK. I've seen a lot of people touching on this topic, and thus because of that, I didn't really feel like I needed to do the same thing. But truth be told, I made this because we're like 5 or 6 months in now, and I don't know what's gonna change and what's gonna improve, as we've seen some really good and healthy alterations, but not enough that I would say substantial to change people's opinions. I want to see MK improve, but how can this be done? Well, first and foremost, transparency and communication. I don't know why they insist on being as quiet as they are, especially when it comes to delaying or extending seasons here. It could very well be due to social media backlash, but at the very least, this far into the game's lifespan, I do think a bit of communication would go a really long way here. What else can be done? Reassess the cameo system and see what's working and what isn't. Find a middle ground and make all cameos ambush so gameplay feels more fluid and interactive. As for gameplay and returning bits, I do think we're too late to implement a Tower of Time system. So, if we are stuck with Invasions, please do have it have some replay value. Hell, here's a great idea. Upon completing, allow players to switch to older seasons, to then claim skins they missed out on. It's a great workaround for FOMO, and lets newer players gain things they wouldn't had in previous seasons. Limit it to 1 or 2 seasons each, and you instantly have more replay value. I mean, hell, if you wanted to, you could also throw the Kombat League skins in to incentivize those strictly offline players to go through Invasions once more. Maybe adding an added layer of difficulty, or changing things up on layer 2 or 3. Point is, give players control over their experience. The only thing this game really needs, or I can see them doing, is sorting out the prices of the store, creating lobbies, and polishing up that netcode. As whilst it's functional, there are still a fair few issues here and there. But I really think that these are the steps needed in order to improve MK1's lifespan. Also, please give us more gameplay variety and modes. With that said, this does generally round up my thoughts and feelings on MK1 as a whole, and what I would say are rather reasonable changes for the game's ecosystem. I know while some probably relish the idea of seeing me scream into a camera about how angry I am with the game, truth be told, I don't think that's a good solution right now. I think we need to analyze and find a solution instead of just shutting the game down. Now look, there are those of you who like the game and those of you who don't. That's only natural with games especially. But I think if there's one common ground we can all kind of agree on, is that we want MK to be better than what it is now. We want it to thrive in a good and very healthy way moving forward. So with that said, down in the comments below, I would super appreciate it if you could put some of your own ideas and suggestions here. It would really mean a lot to me because I think that this needs to be something productive that can ensure the benefit and future of Mortal Kombat moving forward. Worst case scenario, no one watches this and it slips into the ether, but at the very least, it gets people talking about this game in a healthy way. Because I'm gonna be real, it kind of needs it right now.